of the 2017 hurricane season, thankfully with no major storms hitting the U.S. And as we look at these beautiful images of Galveston, Texas, we're reminded that the next Katrina or Andrew could be brewing any day now. But
could be brewing. You know what it's like to brew coffee. You get out the coffee, you put it in the maker, you make sure there's a filter, you plug it in, then you turn it on. Hurricanes are brewed. They are created by man, by humankind. They are not natural disasters.
those two storms they were nothing compared to the storm that hit Galveston and the Texas coast back in 1900. At the time, the Weather Service did not name hurricanes, but even without a name, the Great Storm will never be forgotten.
Okay, now I talked a little bit about naming hurricanes in my other video. The reason they name hurricanes is to embed them in your mind. Secondly, the name has power in it, and it's witchcraft. All right? Now the reverse of that would be the baby born in Bethlehem was given the name Jesus because he will save their people from their sins. Jesus is the Old Testament version of Joshua or Yeshua, meaning God saves people from sins. So it's the reverse. When they name a hurricane, they are inflicting upon people a curse associated with that name and actually tied into that name.
The idyllic beaches of Galveston, Texas. More than 6 million vacationers come here each year, frolicking on the serene shores of the Gulf of Mexico. It's hard to believe, seeing it today, that this peaceful place was the epicenter of the greatest natural disaster in the history of the United States.
No, it wasn't a natural disaster. It was a man-made, created disaster.
It was 1900, and Galveston was thriving. The largest city in all of Texas, a booming population, building fortunes from Galveston's busy commercial port, shipping cotton and receiving goods from Europe.
Galveston was on an incredible growth pattern.
Okay, so why Galveston as the first place to experiment and to bring down upon a city a man-made disaster called a hurricane? Why? Most likely the prosperity that was going on in that city was not associated with the controllers, the ones who were all about getting every penny off of everyone. In other words, it was developing economically, and it was out of control in the sense that it was making loads and loads of money. In fact, it was on its way to becoming the most significant city in the state of Texas, and most likely later even in all of the South. Now the controllers couldn't allow that, obviously, because they were not in on the prosperity that was occurring. They had not yet achieved a, you might say, like a one state economy or one control over the entire economy of the state. And they were left out. And so this prosperity had to stop. And they had a way of doing it, namely a hurricane.
Without a doubt, the Queen City of the Gulf. It rightfully earned that title.
September 8th, 1900 began as a day a lot like this one.
Okay, so let's just add one more day and let's make it September the 9th. What do you have? You have your 9/11 code. September 9th.
Skies and calm seas. But the skies suddenly turned black. The weather took a terrifying turn. The good people of Galveston had virtually no defense against the great storm sweeping in from the sea. A Category 4 hurricane lashed the...
Okay, so you notice how they're showing how they're like it's swirling like that, a swirling effect. Now that's because when they generate the ions from either the land or generate the ions at sea, those ions then swirl with other ions currently in the atmosphere. And I believe I see some demons in this frozen imagery. There's one right here. There's one right there. There's one right there. So they're actually, in the report about this happening of 1900, they're actually using demons swirling in your face right now to use the power of the devil upon you to convince you that this devastating storm just happened to appear out of nowhere and hit Galveston, Texas. Not true. I'm going to try to establish that it was generated, and it was the first generated hurricane. In other words, it's the first actual hurricane in existence, because hurricanes are not natural. They are generated and created by those who know how to control the weather and manipulate the weather.
Community. It carried no name, as was the practice at the time. Winds up to 140 miles an hour, and worse, a storm surge of seawater 15 feet high overwhelmed the unprotected city, leveling.
Now, there's no doubt that they exaggerate on any so-called disaster or tragedy. And there's no doubt that they use a lot of fakery to intensify and exaggerate. So some of the photographs they show or etchings or whatever are most likely exaggerated. However, it is not to deny the fact that something of a major storm hit Galveston in September of the year 1900.
And homes.
In 1900, the storm on September 8th came across the island and pushed water and pushed wind across the island, destroying most of the houses, and many lives were lost.
In an instant, half of Galveston was gone. Homes along the shoreline ripped off their foundations, the storm smashing them into kindling. One of the heartbreaking stories of that...
And now they're going to go into an emotional story about an orphanage and the nuns and the loss of orphans and so forth. Now that is to get you in the realm of emotion. I did some videos called The Science of Fear on one of my other channels. And basically we have two systems. We have the logic system and rationale, and we have the emotion system. The media functions on reaching you through emotions. And once the emotions kick in, the rational part of you is kicked out. So they're going to go into that. So let me go into some other things. So basically they're going to say that this is one of the top natural disasters to hit the United States. And again, my thesis is it's not a natural disaster. It is a created disaster. Number one, September 18th. Okay? And there's your 9, there's your 1, your 9/11, there's your 9, there's your 1, there's your 9/11. It starts on the 8th of September, the 9th of September. Okay? And they're going to give you all kinds of stats. Now, what's interesting is they say in this article, number 2 is San Francisco earthquake, 1906, which is a complete and total hoax. So I'm not saying that the Galveston 1900 hurricane was a hoax. There was a storm that hit, and it was a pretty intense storm. However, it was definitely exaggerated. Now, what folks don't know is this, that 3 years prior to the 1900 storm, Congress purchased 125 acres in Galveston. At the time, it was not called Fort Crockett. That name will come after the 1900 Galveston storm. But the fact remains that this military base was starting to develop in the year 1897. And hence, what you have is a military base, guess where? Right at Galveston. And that military base, most likely, was the source of the storm. And you might be saying, well, I don't know about that. And you know what? That's okay. I'm not here to prove anything to you in any of my videos. But if you just listen to me, maybe you'll tag along and maybe you won't. That's okay. But in the late 1890s, electrical harvesting from the sky is occurring. I did other videos and posted them on this channel about the so-called life-saving stations along the eastern coast. They were the first power plants. They were not a bunch of guys in swimsuits sitting in a little cottage somewhere and going down to the water and looking out and saying, oh, I wonder if there's a wreck offshore and we can get in our little rowboat and row out to it. Come on, wake up. How in the world are they going to know there's a wreck offshore? The telegraph system, or the wireless system of communication, has not yet been employed in the late 1890s. So there's no way of even knowing there's a wreck. And let alone that you can take a rowboat and row out to it. It was all nonsense. So what I'm trying to say is that in the late 1890s, a fort is built later called Fort Crockett. And that's a crocker, you know what? Fort Crockett. And that fort will have grown somewhat in 2 or 3 years prior to the 1900 storm in September of 1900 in Galveston. So what is going on in this fort? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that what was going on was they were building electrical devices that would send ions up into the sky and create the first hurricane. And I said create. It's not an act of the creator. Okay? They create, meaning the ones who have the technology and the know-how. So where does the word hurricane come from? the etymology is not before the public, meaning the origin of the word. It's named for a Mayan god. Okay? A Mayan god, and it comes also from the indigenous people of the Caribbean and maybe even Florida. Okay? And from the Caribbeans, it means the god of evil. From the Mayans, it means the god of wind and storm. So when you say the word hurricane, you're invoking demons. All false gods are demons that are trying to entice people into believing falsehoods. That's what these names are. So let's get back to the video that we were watching.
Took place at St. Mary's Orphanage, a Catholic home for children built right on the shoreline. Nuns, terrified by the rising seas, tethered themselves to their children, determined to protect the little ones from being swept away.
The nuns decided it would be safer to tie the children together in groups of 10.
But the sisters' brave attempt to save lives would be in vain. By the time the howling wind subsided and the ocean returned to its normal level, an estimated 12,000 Americans were dead, 6,000 of them right here in Galveston.
Okay, 12 reversed is your 21. That's your 777.
Is still to this day the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history.
Okay, now they're going to take you to a monument. They love to do monuments to death. And that's what all your war memorials are. Monuments to death. Most of which is fake death. There are some real deaths that occur in war due to disease and due to mistakes and due to people just dying normally of other things. But most of the deaths that are acknowledged in war are just numbers, statistics. They're not actual lives. Again, there may have been some accidents, people dying of disease and so forth. But people getting shot with bullets, no. Blown up with bombs, no. Now, once again, it's the same idea. In Galveston, they have some kind of a false memorial to death of large numbers that did not die. There would have been some small numbers that may have died, but nothing along the lines of what they say. Hence, the monument or the memorial is a way of casting that spell upon you and upon me.
Event commemorated by this poignant statue on the Galveston seawall. When the storm passed, dazed survivors emerged to a Galveston they could not recognize. City streets filled with mountains of rubble.
The debris from the houses and properties and animals and things that accumulated during the course of the storm became a wall of debris that protected the northern part of the island from the rest of the storm and water. So we know that that debris line extended for maybe 2 miles.
Okay, once again, exaggeration. Once again, doctored photos. Okay, now this is not to deny that there was a storm and not to deny that there was destruction. However, it is highly exaggerated. So I'm going to go back to my original thought, and it's this. this storm, like all the storms, has been generated. And it's been generated where? Most likely it was generated here, what is now known as Fort Crockett, but it's also now used, I believe, for marine research or something like that. But at one time it was a military base, and you can see on the timeline of it that it began when? 3 years before the September 1900 Galveston hurricane hit. Okay, so I'm just going to suggest very strongly the first hurricane ever was in 1900 in Galveston. And I don't care if they have some documents somewhere that say they document them back to the 1850s. No, that's just projected backward nonsense, because they know they've generated these things, and they continue to generate them, and they continue to manipulate the weather. But I believe the weather was first manipulated here in Galveston, Texas, in the year 1900, and they created the first thing that we now call a hurricane, and we say about hurricane seasons. Well, it's just basically the weather modification people generating them. So I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I hope it wasn't a real crock of, well, anyhow, I hope it was helpful to you. And I don't proclaim perfection. I don't proclaim I'm always right. But I do like to share my thoughts with you. And for those of you that abide with me, I'd like to thank you very much. End the video.